The highway south of Macon runs straight and flat in the early morning dark. The kind of road that doesn't ask anything from you except to keep your hands on the wheel and your eyes open. Marcus Aldine had been driving since before the sky made up its mind about color. Georgia rolling past on both sides. Pine trees and red clay and fence posts leaning the same direction like they'd all agreed on something decades ago and just kept at it out of habit. Scout had his chin on the door handle, back paws hanging off the edge of the passenger seat, eyes half closed. Not sleeping, just present. The way dogs are when they've decided their whole purpose is to be near you and they're taking that seriously. Marcus hadn't turned on the radio since Tennessee. The silence was fine. Better than fine. Silence didn't need anything from him. It just sat there and let him drive, which was all he needed from it right now. 38 years old, a duffel bag in the truck bed, a dog who trusted him more than he deserved, and a letter from Carver County folded into the glove compartment that he'd been carrying for 4 days without opening a second time, because once had been enough to understand what it meant. Final notice. Property tax delinquency. Parcel 7703 Aldine Road, Carver County, Georgia. 30 days to settle the outstanding balance or the county would move to auction. He'd read it twice in a gas station parking lot outside Chattanooga on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting on the tailgate eating a sandwich that tasted like the plastic it came wrapped in. Scout watching him with that patient expression that communicated without any urgency that something was being waited for. He'd given the last of the sandwich to Scout and sat there watching a truck driver restack pallets across the lot, moving with the rhythm of someone who'd done this 10,000 times and stopped thinking about it long ago. 10 years. He'd been getting letters from that address for 10 years. Letters from the county, letters from the estate attorney, letters from a woman named Dolores at the Carver County Records Office, whose handwriting slanted left and whose patience somehow made everything worse. He'd read every one of them, folded them back into their envelopes, and driven another 200 miles in whatever direction felt least like backward. He wasn't proud of it. He just couldn't stop doing it. Until 30 days. Until a gas station in Tennessee. Until he ran out of directions, so he turned south. The flashback never came gradually. It never did. Just a phone ringing in the dark. 3 in the morning. His bunk at Fort Benning sheets still warm, the room smelling like floor wax and old coffee. A voice he didn't recognize saying his parents' names. Highway 41, December. Black ice. The words impact and instantaneous, and I'm so sorry. He'd sat on the edge of that bunk for a long time. Then he'd gone to the bathroom and held both hands under cold water until they stopped shaking. He never went back to that bunk. 6 weeks later, his service ended. He should have driven south. Back to Georgia. Back to the farmhouse where he'd grown up, where his mother still had his childhood drawings in the kitchen drawer, where his father's work boots would still be beside the back door shaped to his feet. He should have. Instead, he drove north, then west, took jobs that needed hands and didn't ask questions, slept in the truck more nights than not. Scout came 2 years later, a German shepherd from a shelter outside Atlanta, who chose Marcus by the simple method of sitting directly on his feet and refusing to move until the paperwork was signed. He kept getting the letters. He kept not answering. Until 30 days. Until the road ran out of road. Carver County appeared in the windshield the way things do when you've been dreading them long enough that you stop being surprised. A gas station with one working pump. A diner with a hand-painted sign missing 2 letters. A post office that looked like it had been built in 1943 and painted once after that, and left to its own devices. The kind of small town that exists between bigger towns. People drove through more than they drove to. Marcus pulled in for gas. The woman behind the counter glanced at him, then at Scout through the window, then back at Marcus, with the practiced expression of someone who had been reading strangers for 30 years and kept the results to herself. Passing through, she said. It wasn't a question. No, he said. She nodded. Didn't push. Small-town people were good at that. They knew when an answer meant exactly what it said. He bought coffee, held a cup of water for Scout in the parking lot while the dog drank. Then they got back in the truck and turned onto Aldine Road. The road was familiar in the worst possible way. The way you recognize a song you haven't heard in years. You don't remember knowing it until it starts. And then you know every note, every word, every turn. And some part of you wishes you'd stayed in the parking lot a little longer. The Becca farm on the left with the rusted mailbox. The stand of loblolly pines that had grown taller than he remembered. The low dip in the road where water collected every winter, the one his mother used to call the Devil's Puddle, because she'd driven into it twice and considered it a personal failing of the road's character. He passed it slowly, and then the house came into view. Marcus took his foot off the gas. The truck slowed almost on its own, like it understood this moment required a different speed. Here's the thing about 10 years. When you stay away from a place that long, you build a picture. You can't help it. The mind needs something to hold. So you construct a version. Roof caved in, windows gone, porch rotted through, 10 years of Georgia summers and nobody home. You prepare yourself for a specific kind of damage, the damage of a place that gave up waiting. He'd built that picture somewhere around Macon. He'd been carrying it for the last 6 hours, and now it was wrong. The fence was standing, not perfectly patched in two spots, with lumber that didn't quite match the original but standing. The front door was on its hinges, the porch steps were solid, and smoke thin and steady was rising from the chimney. Not a fire someone had just lit, a fire that had been going for hours, a fire that belonged to a morning routine. There was a chicken coop in the side yard. His parents had never had chickens. This one was clearly built without a blueprint, uneven assembled from salvaged materials. But the chickens inside were real and calm, making their unhurried sounds like they'd been there always. A shovel leaned against the oak tree by the driveway, as though someone had set it down an hour ago and intended to come back for it. Marcus stopped the truck at the gate. He sat there for a moment. Scout lifted his head, looked at him, looked at the house, put his chin back down. "Yeah," Marcus said quietly. He got out. The gravel under his boots made the same sound it always had. That particular crunch of loose stone over packed dirt. He'd walked this driveway 10,000 times. His feet remembered before his head did. He'd taken maybe 8 steps. Then the front door opened. A woman stepped onto the porch. Late 20s, dark natural hair pulled back from her face. A flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled past her elbows. She stood at the top of the steps with her arms at her sides, not crossed, not reaching for anything. Just there, holding her ground without making a production of it. Her name, he would learn in a few minutes, was Serena Daw. And there was another presence behind her, barely visible through the screen door. Someone the same height, the same general build, watching with a different quality of attention. More sideways, calculating angles. Serena didn't say hello. She said, "Can I help you?" Not quite a question. The shape of one. Marcus stopped. Scout stopped beside him. "This is my property," Marcus said. "My name is Marcus Aldine. This farm belonged to my parents. The taxes have been delinquent. I'm here to settle them." She didn't react the way people react when they've been caught doing something wrong. Her expression shifted, something behind her eyes adjusted, but it wasn't guilt. It was the recalibration of someone who had been managing hard situations for a long time and was deciding whether this one qualified as dangerous. "We've been here 5 years," she said. "We didn't know anyone owned it. I know you didn't, and I know you know that." She held his eyes. "I'm Serena Daw. My sister Vivian is inside." The silence that followed was strange, not hostile, just the quiet of two true things sitting in the same space without resolving each other. She hadn't known. He hadn't been here. Both facts were real. Neither canceled the other out. Then something happened that Marcus did not anticipate. The screen door hit the porch railing with a crack, and a small figure came out fast, like something released under pressure. 5 years old, small, absolutely certain of himself. He was carrying a rifle, wooden, roughly made, one end clearly a barrel, one end clearly a stock. The whole thing painted with what appeared to be red nail polish for reasons Marcus chose not to examine right now. The boy planted his feet at the top of the steps, pointed the rifle directly at Marcus's chest, and there was no wobble in it. Completely level. "Don't move," the boy said. "You need to leave right now. This is our house." Marcus didn't move. Scout sat down. Marcus looked at the boy, then at the rifle, then at Serena, who had closed her eyes in the specific way of someone enduring something they cannot prevent. Then back at the boy. Marcus raised both hands slowly. "All right," he said. "I surrender." The boy blinked. Completely. The boy looked at Scout. "What about the dog?" Scout surrenders too. Scout on cue lay flat on the gravel with his chin between his front paws. The boy stared at this for a long moment. He had not been expecting full surrender. He was clearly working out what to do with it. Eli, Serena said. Her voice was firm. Come inside. But he has papers, the boy said. He showed me from the driveway. Come inside. Eli lowered the wooden rifle approximately 2 inches. Then he looked at Scout again. Scout thumped his tail once against the gravel. One slow, deliberate thump. Eli walked down the steps, sat directly beside Scout, and placed one hand on the dog's back with the authority of someone who had just been assigned an important function. The tension didn't disappear. It just got smaller. Small enough to work around. Marcus reached into his jacket. Both women stiffened slightly, just enough to notice. He slowed his hand, drew out the folded documents, the tax notice, and the deed paperwork, and held them towards Serena without stepping closer. She came down the steps and took them, read without speaking. That kind of composure isn't something you're born with. It's built from years of needing it and having nothing else to rely on. She handed the pages to Vivian without a word. Vivian read faster, looked up at Marcus, looked at her sister. It's real, Vivian said. I can see that. Serena handed the documents back to Marcus. We haven't damaged anything, she said. We've repaired things. The roof over the back bedroom was open when we arrived. A window was broken. The porch rail on the left side had pulled away from the post. We fixed everything. We've grown food on the land. We haven't sold anything from the property itself. Only what we've raised and made. I noticed, Marcus said. Both things. She looked at him for a moment. Measuring. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone already on the phone with the sheriff. Marcus folded the documents and put them back inside his jacket. He looked past her at the front door, which stood open. From the driveway, he could see the hallway. The floor swept clean. A coat hook on the wall with a child's jacket hanging from it and a woman's scarf. His mother had put up that coat hook. He'd stood on a chair beside her, holding the level, while she drilled 9 years old. She'd been frustrated with the angle for 3 days before she was satisfied. Something in his chest moved. Not painfully, just moved. I'm not calling anyone, he said. Serena's shoulders dropped a fraction. Not relief exactly. The first loosening of something that had been held very tight for a very long time. He stepped up onto the porch, stopped in the doorway. He'd been building readiness for this moment since Tennessee, since he turned onto Aldine Road. He'd constructed it carefully, the way you build something that needs to hold weight. It held for about 4 seconds. Then he saw the photograph. Left wall of the hallway. A frame he recognized, dark wood, slightly oval. The kind his mother had found at a church sale and refinished herself with a stain that smelled like vinegar for a week. She'd been proud of that frame. Told him about it on a phone call, like he could see it through the receiver. The photograph inside wasn't one he'd ever seen. Frank and Carol Aldine standing in front of the farmhouse, younger than he last remembered them. His father maybe mid-40s, his mother the same. Her head turned towards something just off camera, caught in the middle of a laugh. He'd forgotten that laugh. He'd forgotten the shape of it on her face. Beside his parents, slightly to the right, stood a man. 50s, heavy through the shoulders, smiling in the careful way of someone who is very aware of how they look when they smile. Marcus studied the face. He didn't know it. Not yet. But something registered below the level of recognition. A wrongness he couldn't name because he didn't have enough information to name it yet. He filed it away. Where did this come from, he said. Serena came to stand beside him. We found it under the floorboards in the back bedroom. When we replaced a section of subfloor that had gone soft, there was a loose board, and underneath it several things. That photograph was one of them. You don't know who the man is? No. We thought maybe a family friend, someone from before. Marcus looked at the photograph a moment longer. His father didn't hide things. Frank Aldine was the most straightforward person Marcus had ever known. A farmer, a plain speaker, a man who kept everything in its proper place and said what he meant and expected the same in return. He didn't hide things because he'd never thought he had anything that needed hiding. So why was this under a floorboard? He stepped fully into the house. The air didn't carry the stale weight of an abandoned place. Someone had swept the floor, not perfectly, but with care. A fire going in the wood stove. On the kitchen table visible from the hallway, a jar of wildflowers and a coffee can. This wasn't survival by accident. Someone had decided this place was worth keeping and then done the work of keeping it. He was still standing in the hallway when Miss Ruth Hadley appeared from the back of the house. Late 60s, white hair cut short and close, hands that showed decades of use, not just physical labor, but the layered quality of someone who had grated papers and kneaded dough and planted things and turned pages, all of it leaving its particular mark on the same pair of hands. She carried a basket of garden vegetables. She stopped when she saw Marcus. He stopped looking at the hallway. They looked at each other. "You have your mother's eyes," she said. "Not your mother's name. Not I knew your parents. Just the eyes." As if that was the essential fact and everything else could follow in its own time. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He'd heard that all his life. At the funeral. From his father's old friends. The woman at the hardware store in town who sold seed packets to his mother every spring. Carol's eyes, they always said. He hadn't heard it in 10 years. He'd forgotten how it landed. "You knew her," he said. "We taught at the same school, Carver County Elementary. Not at the same time. She was there before I started, but she came back once for a book fair. We met maybe 3 times total." She extended her hand. "Ruth Hadley. Everyone calls me Miss Ruth." He shook it. "Marcus Aldine." "I know who you are," she said simply, without drama. "She kept your photograph on her desk at school. I found it in storage 4 years ago going through old boxes. She kept it for years." He didn't know what to say to that. Neither did she for a moment. Then Miss Ruth picked up her basket and walked to the kitchen like she'd been doing it for years. Because it turned out she had been. They sat at the kitchen table, all of them. Serena across from Marcus, arms on the table, meeting his eyes directly. Vivian beside her sister, watching him with that sideways attention, still calculating. Miss Ruth at the end, already filling the kettle without asking. Eli on the floor next to Scout, the wooden rifle across his knees on standby in case the situation deteriorated. Marcus looked at each of them in turn. "Tell me," he said. Serena looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at Serena. 4 seconds of conversation without a single word, the kind of shorthand that develops between people who have lived through the same thing so many times that language becomes unnecessary. Serena turned back to Marcus and started talking. 5 years ago, she and Vivian had been moving through Georgia the way people move when there's no center left to orbit. Seasonal work, motel rooms when the money held, Vivian's car when it didn't. Serena was 3 months pregnant. The man who should have been part of that had looked at the situation, done a quick calculation, and found a reason to leave. Their situation at the time had been complicated and support had been non-existent. November. Cold the way Georgia. November is cold, not dramatic, just relentless. 2 weeks in the car, then a shelter in Milledgeville with not enough beds and a 30-day maximum stay policy. Then back in the car. Then Vivian had driven up Aldine Road one evening, looking for a field entrance where they could park out of sight from the highway. She'd seen the farmhouse dark in every window, the gate hanging open, weeds working their way up the porch steps. She drove past it twice. Then she turned in. "We checked," Serena said. "We knocked. We waited 2 days before we tried the door. The lock was already broken." "Not defensive," Vivian said. "Just accurate. We weren't going to stay," Serena said. "Just until we figured out what came next." But then Eli came. Born in this house. Miss Ruth had been living 3 miles down Aldine Road at the time, renting a small place from a neighbor. She arrived with a casserole the first week and stayed when it became clear that no one was going to a hospital and someone needed to be there. After Eli leaving felt impossible in a different way. So they stayed, fixed the roof, patched the window, built the chicken coop out of salvaged lumber and the stubbornness that comes from having no other options. They planted, learned what the land would give and what it wouldn't. Tried again the following season. Miss Ruth had driven over regularly in those early years, helping with Eli, sharing what she grew in her own garden. 6 months ago, when her landlord sold the rental, and the next available place was 3 months out, Serena had simply said, "There's a room." No ceremony, just "there's a room." Marcus listened to all of it without interrupting. When people explain themselves mid-story, it's never really about you. It's about them needing the discomfort to stop. He let them finish. Then he was quiet. Scout had migrated from the floor to lean against Marcus's leg under the table. Eli had migrated from the floor to lean against Scout. The wooden rifle rested against the wall. Stood down. "You said you found things under the floorboard," Marcus said. Serena nodded. "What else was there?" Vivian got up without speaking, came back from the back room with a small cardboard box, set it on the table. Marcus looked at it. Not at the box itself, at the handwriting on the side. His father's handwriting. Precise, slightly tilted right. The printing of a man who had taught himself to write clearly and never quite made it to cursive. "Marcus, when you're ready." Marcus looked at that for a long moment. "You didn't open it," he said. "No," Serena said. "Neither of you." "No." He pulled the box toward him. Without planning it, everyone found somewhere else to be. Vivian moved to check the back rooms. Serena settled Eli at the far end of the table with a drawing project, his back turned, head bent, pencil moving. Miss Ruth set a cup of tea near Marcus's elbow and walked out of the kitchen without a word. Just Marcus. Just the box. He sat with it for a full minute before he touched anything. The kitchen smelled like wood smoke and something baked earlier in the day, a smell that reached back past 10 years of parking lots and gas station coffee and motel rooms, back to mornings that had seemed ordinary at the time and only revealed themselves as something else long after they were gone. He opened the box. A photograph. His parents in their mid-30s standing in front of the farmhouse the year they bought it. The oak tree barely taller than his father's shoulder. Both of them looking at the camera with the faces of people who have just done something terrifying and are trying not to look like they have. His father's watch. A Belova with a leather strap repaired once with electrical tape because the tape worked fine and that was that. The crystal cracked in one corner. His own birth announcement printed from a home computer. Frank and Carol Aldean are pleased to announce. 8 pounds 4 ounces, in the margin in his father's handwriting already causing trouble. A small notebook. Navy blue cover. Hardware store variety $2. Frank Aldean had kept them for years. Feed schedules, repair lists, weather notes. The working record of an ordinary farming life. Marcus turned through the pages. Fence repair, February. Seed order, March. Water pump gasket, June. Page after page of plain documentation of a life that knew what it was and didn't need to be anything else. He nearly closed it. Then he turned to the last page. 2 lines, written heavier than anything else on any other page. The pen pressed down, the letters deliberate. The writing of a man who needed to be absolutely certain something would be read. Gordon Mercer, $47,000. Do not sign anything he gives you. Not anything. Whatever he says, no date, no explanation, just the name, the number, and the warning. Marcus read it 3 times. Then he set the notebook down and looked at the wall. His father was not a man who wrote warnings in the backs of notebooks. His father was not a man who hid things under floorboards. His father was not a man who left boxes labeled with his son's name in case something happened to him. Except apparently he had been all of those things. He'd done it without telling Marcus, without calling, without any of the usual methods a man uses to get a message to his son. He'd done it this way, box under the floor name on the outside when you're ready, which meant he'd known. He'd known something might happen. He'd known enough to prepare for it. And what had happened was Highway 41, black ice, the words impact and instantaneous. Marcus closed the notebook. He sat in the kitchen with the sound of Eli's pencil moving at the far end of the table, with Scout slow breathing against his leg, with the chickens outside being peacefully indifferent to all of it. He thought about a name he had never heard before today. Gordon Mercer, $47,000. Not anything. That evening, after a dinner that no one had formally planned, but that happened anyway. Miss Ruth at the stove, Vivian setting plates, Eli narrating every step of the process to Scout, with the thoroughness of a sports announcer. Marcus went back to the photograph on the hallway wall. The man beside his parents, heavy through the shoulders, that careful smile. Marcus looked at that face for a long time. He still didn't know the name, but he had the feeling the one that had registered when he first saw the photograph. Below recognition, a wrongness he'd filed away because he didn't have enough information to name it yet. He had a name now. Gordon Mercer. He didn't know yet what connected the name to the face. He didn't know what the 47,000 meant or why his father had pressed that warning into the back of a $2 notebook with enough force to read it from the other side of the page. He didn't know what this man had to do with a box under a floorboard and a photograph hidden alongside it, but he was going to find out. Come on. That was the first clear thought he'd had in 10 years that pointed somewhere specific, not away from something, towards something. Serena had offered the couch without quite meeting his eyes, which was its own kind of grace. The offer was genuine, but the house was small and the situation was strange, and nobody needed a man they'd known for 8 hours sleeping in the next room. He thanked her and said the truck was fine. It was fine. He'd slept in it enough nights that the cab had its own familiarity. The angle of the headrest, the way Scout arranged himself across the passenger seat when he was off duty, the sound Georgia wind made against the side windows when it came across open fields at night. He'd loved that sound as a kid. He hadn't thought about it once in 10 years. He lay on his back looking up at the ceiling of the cab. The notebook rested on his chest, one hand on Scout's side. Gordon Mercer, the man in the photograph. His father's warning pressed deep enough to read from the other side of the page. Around 2 in the morning, the back door of the farmhouse opened. Footsteps on the porch, not coming toward the truck, just someone standing outside in the dark, the way people do when the inside of a house gets too small for whatever they're carrying. Marcus lay still. After a few minutes, the footsteps went back inside. The door closed. He thought about his mother in the photograph. Her head turned towards something just off camera, caught mid-laugh. The laugh he'd heard 1,000 times growing up and had completely forgotten the sound of until he saw the shape of it on her face today. That was the thing about 10 years of not going back. You lost things in pieces, quietly, without noticing. Not all at once, one by one, the way you lose small objects during a long move, until one day you reach for something you were certain you had, and it simply isn't there. He'd lost the sound of his mother's laugh without knowing it was gone. Marcus pressed the heel of one hand against his mouth, breathed through whatever came up. Let it move. Don't hold it. Don't chase it. Just let it move. He lowered his hand. Scout stirred, resettled, put his chin on Marcus's arm. The wind came back across the fields, low and steady. Outside, the Georgia night was wide and dark, and the stars were doing what they do out here, away from town, where nothing competes with them, going hard and clear and indifferent the way they have been for longer than anyone has been around to notice. Morning came without ceremony. Gray first, then the slow accumulation of pale gold that passes for spring light in this part of the county, not arriving so much as building. Marcus was up at 5 old habit, the kind installed so deep it stops being a choice and becomes simply what your body does when the dark starts thinning. He walked the full property before the house stirred, not inspecting, not making lists, just walking, getting the measure of ground he'd grown up on but hadn't touched in a decade. The east fence needed work 3 sections down, one post gone soft at the base. He'd fix that first. The greenhouse behind the house stopped him for a full 5 minutes. He stood at the edge of it in the early light and just looked. Salvage lumber for the frame, plastic sheeting in 2 layers with a deliberate gap between them, a low-tech insulation approach that required real thought to arrive at. Raised beds inside seedlings already growing. Collards, onions, the beginnings of something that looked like it might be beans. His mother had grown tomatoes in this spot. One summer she tried peppers and declared them a personal insult, and then tried again the following year out of principle and been insulted again. He stood there and let himself remember that. Then he went to find the post hole digger. The east fence took most of the morning. Eli appeared at 9 o'clock with binoculars around his neck and a stick he was using as a walking staff, and on his right hand, one of Miss Ruth's oven mitts. "I'm ready," Eli said. For what Marcus said. "Patrol." Marcus kept working the fence wire. "South perimeter first. Stay where I can see you." Eli lifted the binoculars, scanned south, scanned north, looked at Marcus. "What am I looking for?" "Anything that shouldn't be there." For the next hour, Eli moved along the fence line with the seriousness of someone who had been given a real assignment and intended to honor it. He stopped 3 times to crouch and examine something on the ground. Once he brought back a feather large, brown tip curved. "Hawk," Marcus said without looking up. Eli examined the feather with this new information, then turned and went back to his route. Marcus kept working. The thing was, it helped. Not Eli specifically, not the patrol specifically, just the uncomplicated presence of someone who needed something simple and was completely satisfied when you gave it. Marcus hadn't realized how long it had been since anyone had asked him for something that easy to provide. He was clearing the drainage ditch behind the greenhouse that afternoon when he heard the car. A dark sedan coming up the driveway, moving with the ease of someone accustomed to arriving places and being welcomed. The driver got out before Marcus reached the corner of the house. 50s, heavy through the shoulders, blue suit, shoes that cost more than a week of fence repair. He walked toward the front porch with unhurried confidence. Serena was already on the steps. Marcus came around the side of the house. The man saw him, smiled, extended his hand. "Mr. Aldine? I heard you were back in town. Gordon Mercer. I've had some interest in this property for a while now, and I thought this might be a good time to have a conversation about your options. I understand the tax situation has been complicated, and I have resources that could help resolve things quickly and fairly for everyone involved." Marcus looked at the man's face, and it hit him. Not just the name from the notebook, the face, the photograph on the hallway wall, his parents standing in front of the farmhouse, his mother mid-laugh, the man to their right with that specific careful smile. Exactly this smile, the same calculation behind it, the same awareness of how it looked. Marcus let him finish. Whatever Mercer was saying about market value and tax situations and resources to help resolve things quickly, he let the man say all of it. Then he said, "I'm not selling." Mercer's smile adjusted. It stayed in place, but it adjusted. "I understand it's a lot to take in. I don't need an answer today." "I'm not selling," Marcus said again. "Not today. Not any day." A beat. Mercer looked at the house, then back at Marcus. The smile one more time, working harder now, showing the effort at the edges in a way it hadn't before. "You know where to find me," Mercer said. He walked back to his car, got in, drove away. Marcus watched until the car was gone. Then he stood in the gravel driveway a moment longer, his father's warning sitting in his chest like something swallowed. Do not sign anything he gives you. Not anything. Whatever he says. That night, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open in front of him. 2 lines, heavy ink. His father's hand. Serena stood at the kitchen counter washing out the coffee pot. Not talking, not filling the air. After a while, she said without turning around, "He's been here before. Once about 8 months ago. Said he was doing research on agricultural land values in the county. Asked if we'd seen any county notices on the property." She set the pot down. "He already knew who owned it," Marcus said. Serena turned around then, looked at him directly. "He already knew you were coming, before you even got here." Marcus didn't say anything for a moment. "He's been waiting," Marcus said. Serena looked at the notebook on the table. Then she said, "What's in it?" "A warning. My father wrote it. Last entry. Different from everything else. His name, a number, and a warning not to sign anything he gives me." She looked at the table, then at Marcus. "Okay," she said. Just that one word. But the way she said it, flat forward facing the voice of someone already turning toward what came next, told Marcus that she wasn't going anywhere. That whatever this was, she would stand in it with him. Not because she owed him anything, but because this house had been her home for 5 years, and she was done being the kind of person who waited to be told what was happening in her own home. She folded the dish towel over the oven handle, turned off the kitchen light, and walked down the hallway. Marcus sat alone at the table. The wood stove ticked softly. Scout exhaled from the floor. Outside, the Georgia night was wide and dark stars coming out over the fields, more of them every minute as the last light drained from the west. His father's farm, his father's warning, his father's name on a box left under a floor. When you're ready. He hadn't been ready for 10 years. He was here now, and for the first time since he'd turned south on that highway and stopped running in the direction that felt least like backward, he wasn't thinking about leaving. He was thinking about what needed to happen next. Marcus was up before 4. Not because he'd slept badly. He'd slept the way he always slept in the truck, in segments, each one complete, separated by stretches of quiet wakefulness, where he lay still and let his mind do what it needed to do without chasing it. Scout was already sitting up when Marcus opened his eyes, looking at him with the expression of a dog who had decided the night was finished and was waiting politely for the rest of the world to agree. Marcus sat up, reached for the notebook, held it without opening it. Gordon Mercer, $47,000. Not anything. Outside, the Georgia fields were still fully dark. No gray yet, just the stars going hard above the south fence line, the way they go out here away from town where nothing competes with them. The oak tree at the end of the driveway was a shape against the sky, bare-branched in the early spring cold, but rooted so deep you could feel it just by standing near it. He set the notebook on the seat, got out of the truck. The morning air was cold and clean and smelled like turned earth and pine resin, and something faintly green that meant the season was changing, whether anyone was ready or not. Marcus walked the fence line without a light following the path his feet remembered before his eyes could confirm it. The east fence repaired yesterday, the south run still solid. The northwest corner where his father had replaced posts 3 times because the soil there held water and rotted everything it touched. Frank Aldine had known every inch of this ground, had walked it the same way probably at the same hour for the better part of 30 years. Marcus came back to the truck as the first gray was starting to show at the eastern edge of the sky. He fed Scout from the bag behind the seat, drank the last of the coffee that Serena had left in a thermos on the porch railing the night before without saying anything about it, and thought about what he knew and what he didn't. What he knew: Gordon Mercer had been to this property 8 months ago asking questions he already knew the answers to. Mercer had a photograph with Marcus's parents that had been hidden under a floorboard. Mercer had been warned against in the last entry of his father's notebook with a specific dollar amount attached, and a warning written with the kind of force a man uses when he needs to be certain the words survive him. What he didn't know everything else. That was about to change. He went inside at 6. Miss Ruth was already at the stove, moving through the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had fed other people for so long it required no deliberate thought. Eggs going in a pan, biscuits in the oven, coffee in the pot that had been running without interruption since approximately the previous century. Serena came in from the hallway. Eli on her hip, clearly a temporary arrangement since he was already too big for it, but some mornings apparently required the altitude. She set him down, handed him a biscuit, looked at Marcus. "If you're going somewhere today," she said, "the drainage ditch behind the greenhouse still needs finishing. Not a request, not a demand. Just here is what the land needs. Take it or leave it." "I have something to do first," Marcus said. "I'll be back before noon." She nodded. Didn't ask. Eli from his corner had been watching this exchange with complete seriousness. Then he looked at Scout, stationed by the refrigerator in his morning position of focused optimism. "Scout," Eli said. Scout's ears went up. "You're on interior patrol." Marcus looked at Scout. Scout looked at Marcus. "He's right," Marcus said. Miss Ruth made a sound from the stove that she covered quickly. It fooled nobody. The Carver County Municipal Building sat on Main Street in a brick building from the early 1940s that had been added onto twice, painted over 3 times, and still looked exactly like what it was, a place where official things happened at official speeds. The waiting area chairs had not been replaced since Marcus was in grade school. The overhead lighting had the particular quality of fluorescent bulbs that had been flickering for so long everyone stopped noticing. Sheriff Dale Odom's office occupied the east end of the building. Marcus had called ahead from the truck. Odom had said, "Come in." Odom was at his desk when Marcus arrived, and he stood when Marcus came through the door. He knew who Marcus was before Marcus said his name. It was visible in the way Odom looked at him, recognition with something behind it. Not just familiarity, something older, something that had been waiting. "Sit down," Odom said. Marcus sat. Odom was 55, built like someone who had been strong at 30, and kept himself functional without making it a project. Gray at the temples, more coming. A face shaped by decades of knowing more than he could act on. The weight of a man who had signed his name to conclusions he didn't fully believe. Marcus set the notebook on the desk open to the last page. Odom looked at it, read the 2 lines. His jaw tightened slightly at the hinge there and gone. He looked up at Marcus. "Where did you find this?" "Box under the floorboard in the back bedroom. My father left it. My name on the outside." Odom looked at the notebook again, at the name, at the number. at the warning written heavy enough to press through to the page beneath it. Then he leaned back, looked at Marcus with the expression of a man setting something down. He's been carrying in the dark for a very long time, and said, "I knew your father. We didn't run in the same circles much as adults, different lives, but I respected Frank Aldine. He was the kind of man who meant what he said." A pause. "I signed the accident report," Odom said. "Highway 41, 10 years ago. December." The room got quiet in the way rooms get when something important is being placed on a table between two people. "Brake failure," Marcus said. "That's what the report says. That's what the report says." A beat. "Is that what you believe?" Odom didn't answer immediately. He looked at the window. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk, took out a manila folder, and set it on the desk between them. He didn't open it. "The car was serviced 4 days before the accident," Odom said. "There was one shop within 30 miles at the time. Carver County Automotive on Route 9. Owner was a man named Deshaun Vickers. Good reputation. 11 years in business." He stopped. "Vickers sold his stake 8 months after the accident. Relocated to Alabama. I tried to reach him twice in the 2 years after. Neither attempt went anywhere." Marcus looked at the folder. "Who bought Vickers' stake?" Odom looked at him steadily. "You have a name already. I want to hear yours. Gordon Mercer." Odom nodded once. "Bought 40% of that shop 14 months before the accident. I found that out 2 years after the fact, going through old business filings on something completely unrelated. By then, Vickers was gone. The shop had changed hands twice more. Physical records long since disposed of in the normal course of business." He let that sit. "I couldn't close the accident investigation," Odom said. "Couldn't reopen it either. What I had was a connection that looked wrong and a chain with 3 links missing. But I kept the file." Marcus looked at the manila folder, thought about the notebook. His father's handwriting pressed deep into the last page. "What did my father tell you?" Marcus said. Odom's expression shifted. "Your father came to see me about 11 months before the accident. Said someone had approached him about a land development deal in the county. Gordon Mercer was brokering it. Said the numbers didn't hold up. He declined. But the approach hadn't stopped." Marcus waited. "He mentioned a previous arrangement that had gone sour," Odom said. "Didn't give specifics. Said he had documents he was keeping somewhere safe in case things escalated. I told him to be careful. That's all I did. I told him to be careful, and I had nothing concrete. And 13 months later, I was signing his accident report." They sat with that. An old regret and a newer one sharing the same room. Marcus stood, picked up his jacket. Then he looked at Odom. "I need to go to Savannah," Marcus said. "My mother left documents with an attorney there. I found the name in the estate letters I'd been carrying. The firm closed years ago, but the attorney is still in the county. I called him last night." "What did he say?" "Come in the morning." Odom stood as well. "When you have what you need, come back here first, before you do anything else. I'll be here." "I've been waiting 10 years to have something real to work with," Odom said. He met Marcus's eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." Marcus got halfway down the front steps of the municipal building before he stopped. He stood there in the cold morning air, not moving, just standing. Looking at the street, the parking lot, the ordinary Carver County morning going about its business on the other side of the building. He pressed one hand flat against the stair railing, breathed once. 14 months before the accident, Gordon Mercer had purchased a 40% stake in the only garage that serviced his parents' car. 4 days before the accident, that car was brought in for service. 8 months after 2 people died on Highway 41, the garage owner had sold everything and left the state. And 19 days after the funeral, 19 days Mercer had filed a purchase intent application on the Aldine property. Marcus had found that detail in the estate letters he'd been carrying for 10 years without reading closely enough. He pressed his hand harder against the railing. Let it be what it was. Then he walked to the truck. The drive to Savannah took 2 hours. Marcus drove it the way he drove most things, steadily, without urgency, letting the road do what roads do when you stop fighting them. Scout had his chin on the window frame, ears moving in the air, coming through the gap at the top. The county Darnell had grown up in gave way to the highway, and the highway gave way to the city spreading out ahead in the morning light. Attorney Wendell Cray's office occupied the second floor above a hardware store on a side street off Savannah's main corridor. Exterior stairs on the side of the building. a door with frosted glass. Inside, two windows, a desk, bookshelves, floor to ceiling, and a coffee maker that had clearly been running without interruption for a significant portion of the past decade. Cray himself was 72, thin white hair worn close, eyes sharp in the way of someone who had spent 50 years reading contracts and understanding what the words were actually saying underneath the words they appeared to be saying. He stood when Marcus came in, looked at him for a moment. "You have your father's jaw," Cray said, "and your mother everywhere else." "I've heard that," Marcus said. "Sit down." Marcus sat. Scout settled beside the chair and put his chin on Marcus's boot. Cray went to the bookshelf. Not a filing cabinet, an actual shelf organized by a system only he could navigate. He found what he needed in under a minute. A red accordion folder, thick, held together with a rubber band gone brittle with age. He set it on the desk between them. "Your mother brought this to me a little over 10 years ago," Cray said. "About 4 months before the accident on Highway 41. Marcus looked at the folder. 4 months. His mother had been here 4 months before Highway 41, preparing for something she hoped would never happen. "She came alone," Cray continued. "She didn't tell your father she was coming, which she mentioned, and which I noted. She said there were things she needed in safekeeping with someone she trusted. She trusted me because I'd handled a previous matter for your family, a boundary dispute with a neighboring property miner, but she remembered." He looked at Marcus evenly. "She also said that if anything happened to her or your father before she came back for the documents, I was to hold everything until you came for it. She said that specifically. Hold it for Marcus. He'll come when he's ready." A pause. "It took some time." "It did," Marcus said. "She said that too, that it would take time. No judgment in it, just the fact of it laid flat." Marcus looked at the folder. Then he opened it. His mother had been a teacher for 28 years. She knew how to create order for a specific reader. She knew how to arrange information so that someone coming to it without prior knowledge could follow from beginning to end and arrive at understanding rather than confusion. She had prepared this for one reader specifically. She had prepared it for him. The original property deed. Clean, complete. Both his parents' signatures legible, the county stamp intact, the chain of ownership unambiguous and unbroken. No gap that a patient man with resources could wedge open. His father's will. Properly drawn, properly witnessed. Everything to Marcus, with one provision: the farmhouse was not to be sold within the first 5 years of inheritance and was to be maintained as a family home during that period. The restriction had lapsed. Marcus was a decade past it, but the will itself was valid and the ownership was clear. Then the other documents. A promissory note dated 14 years ago, signed by Gordon Mercer, acknowledging a personal debt of $47,000 owed to Frank Aldine, repayable within 3 years. Attached to it, a letter from Mercer requesting an extension on repayment. Then a second letter, another extension, a third, and finally a letter from his father, formal brief dated 13 months before the accident, stating that no further extensions would be granted and that the matter would be referred to legal counsel within 60 days if payment was not received. 60 days, written 13 months before Highway 41. Marcus set the promissory note down, picked up the next document, a land development agreement. 14 years ago, Mercer's holding company, operating under a name Marcus didn't recognize, had been brokering a development scheme in Carver County, a proposal to build mixed residential and commercial property on agricultural land. Multiple landowners approached. Frank Aldine had been one of them. The agreement would have transferred partial development rights to Mercer's company in exchange for a promised share of future profits projected to be substantial. His father had refused to sign. Marcus read the agreement carefully. All of it. Then he read it again. The profit-sharing clause, the thresholds, the definitions nested inside definitions, the conditions constructed to appear reasonable on a first reading and become impossible on a third. His father had seen it, had refused, had gone back to Mercer about the $47,000, had made a final demand: pay what you owe in 60 days or face legal action. A man with a fraudulent scheme in progress, a creditor threatening to drag him into court. 13 months later, Highway 41, December, black ice. Marcus set the documents down. The room was quiet except for the coffee maker doing something thermal in the corner. She knew, Marcus said. She figured it out, Cray said. She went through the development agreement line by line, traced the language back. Then she found the loan records and understood what the demand letter meant in context. She was planning to bring everything to the county attorney. She came to me to make sure the documents survived in case something happened before she got there. Something happened before she got there. 4 months between when she sat in this office and when the call came through at 3 in the morning. Yes. Marcus looked at the documents on the desk. Everything his father had tried to protect by refusing to sign. Everything his mother had quietly, carefully assembled and carried to a man she trusted in a second-floor office above a hardware store, left there for him, for whenever he found his way back. I've already made copies, Cray said. The first set 5 years ago when it seemed like you might not come. Again last year, keeping things current. Marcus looked at the man. Thank you. Cray waved it off. The gesture of someone who doesn't want thanks for doing what was simply right and long overdue. One more thing, Cray said. He opened the center drawer of his desk, took out a small envelope, white, sealed. Marcus's name on the front in his mother's handwriting, that particular forward tilt, the way she crossed her T's with a slight leftward hook she'd never corrected because she didn't think it needed correcting. She left this separately from the documents, Cray said. Said it was personal. Said I'd know when to give it to you. He set the envelope on top of the folder. I think this is when Marcus picked up the folder and the envelope, shook Cray's hand. Your father was a man who did the right thing when it cost him something. Cray said, that's rarer than it should be. Marcus shook the hand, didn't answer. Some things you can't answer without your voice doing something you don't want it to do in front of a man you've just met. He walked out, sat in the truck for 10 minutes before he started it. Scout put his chin on Marcus's arm. Marcus opened the envelope. His mother had never used more words than something required. 3 sentences. I know you think leaving was wrong. It wasn't. Coming back is right. Those are different things. The house is big enough for more than just memory. Fill it. Love, Mom. He read it twice. Then he pressed the letter flat against the steering wheel. Both hands held it there for a moment. Just a man in a truck holding a letter his mother wrote more than 10 years ago in a second-floor office in Savannah because she loved her son enough to prepare for the worst and leave him something to land on when he finally got there. He folded the letter carefully, put it inside his jacket against his chest, started the truck. He was pulling out onto the street when his phone rang. Vivian. He picked up on the first ring. Her voice was controlled and flat in the way it got when she was managing something much larger than she wanted to show. Quiet title action, she said. No greeting. Straight to it. Filed this morning while you were in Savannah. He's claiming ownership is disputed and requesting a court-ordered review. Marcus merged onto the northbound highway and pointed the truck toward Carver County. He filed while I was gone. Someone's been watching the gate, Vivian said. He waited for the truck to leave. If it goes unchallenged, it freezes any ownership confirmation and ties the property in process for months, long enough to find another angle. I have the original deed, Marcus said. The will, the promissory note, the development scheme, the whole picture. A silence. A different kind of silence than before. The silence of someone who has been calculating variables all day and has just received the one that changes the equation. All of it, Vivian said. All of it. With the original deed on record, a quiet title action has no basis. It dies at preliminary review if the ownership chain is clear. When's the review? I don't know yet. I'm going to Odom now. He can have the county attorney file a response today. A breath on the other end. Drive careful, she said. She ended the call. Marcus drove north. The valley opened up on both sides. The hills he'd grown up looking at. The angle of mid-morning light on the western ridge that he'd seen 10,000 times before he was old enough to know he was memorizing it. He thought about Mercer watching the driveway waiting for the truck to disappear. The same patience his father had identified and tried to address through proper channels with a demand letter and 60 days' notice. The same patience that had moved on the property 19 days after a funeral. The same patience that had waited 10 years for a son who never came home and then moved again the moment that son said no. Marcus pressed the accelerator down another degree. He came back through the farm first. Not because it was on the way, because he needed to. Serena was in the greenhouse when he came around the back corner, hands in the soil transplanting seedlings from starting trays into the raised beds. She didn't look up when he came in, just kept working. The particular focus of someone who finds steadiness in the task itself, not in the outcome. The man in the photograph, she said. Mercer. He had something to do with the accident, not a question. It's circumstantial, Marcus said. For now, he owned part of the garage. It serviced the car. The mechanic sold out and disappeared 8 months after. But there's an attorney in Savannah who's been holding documents my mother left him 4 months before the accident. She knew something was coming. She prepared for it. Serena moved to the next seedling. Pressed the soil around the base with 2 fingers, careful and deliberate. What do you need, she said. To get to the sheriff. And then the county attorney needs this package tonight. She looked up then, held his eyes for a moment, then went back to the seedlings. Come back before dark, she said. It was the right thing to say. Not come back safe, not be careful. Just come back before dark. Simple. Specific. The kind of instruction a person gives when they expect to be obeyed. Odom had the folder open on his desk in under a minute. He read without speaking. His face stayed level, the composure of someone who had trained himself to receive information before responding to it. His jaw tightened once at the promissory note. Came back twice at the development agreement. He read that one in full. Then he set everything down and was quiet. Then he said, how many families? Marcus told him what he'd been able to piece together from the documents. The references to other landowners approached the scale of the scheme, the pattern of the same company operating under different names. I think there are more, Marcus said. I need someone with access to county records to pull the full picture. Odom picked up the fake boundary notice from the corner of his desk where it had been sitting since Marcus brought it in that morning. Turned it over. Set it back down. With the original deed on record, the quiet title action has no legal basis, Odom said. He either didn't know you had it, or he was betting you didn't know what to do with it. The fraud, that's a longer road. Opening an investigation. Pulling the old accident records. Finding Vickers. That takes time and process and cooperation from the state. He paused. But it starts with what you've brought me today. This is real material, not a feeling, not a broken chain. Marcus nodded. He'll know, Odom said. When we respond to the filing, when the deed lands on record, he'll understand what you've got. He may do something reactive. Reactive would be better than patient, Marcus said. Patient is what he's been for 15 years. Odom almost smiled. The corner of his mouth moved. He slid the second accordion folder across the desk. I'll have the response filed before 5, he said. County attorney gets the full package tonight. Marcus was halfway back to the truck when his phone rang again. Vivian, still at the records office, she said. I found something. Tell me. A pause. Not dramatic. The pause of someone who has been staring at numbers all afternoon and needs a breath before saying the last ones. It's not 7 families, she said. It's not 10. It's 17. Going back 22 years. 5 of them lost their properties entirely, not just equity, everything. 2 more are still carrying debt they can't trace the origin of. And all 17 transactions run through the same entity. Different names, same principles listed in every filing. Same signature on the operating agreements. She stopped. Then her voice shifting, still controlled, but the flatness carrying something in it now. Darnell, this started before we were born. What he did to your parents, it wasn't the first time. It wasn't close to the first time. Marcus stood in the parking lot outside Odom's office. A quiet Wednesday afternoon in Carver County. Everything going about its ordinary business on the other side of the lot. Come home when you're done, Marcus said. Before dark, Vivian said. She ended the call. Marcus stood there another moment. 17 families. 22 years of the same scheme. The same patience. The same language built to take from people who trusted that what they were signing meant what it appeared to mean. His father had seen it, had refused, had tried to address it through proper channels, a demand letter, an expectation that the system would work if you gave it the right materials. His mother had gone further, had assembled the evidence, had driven to Savannah alone and left everything with a man she trusted because she understood that careful wasn't always enough. That sometimes what was coming at you had patience and resources and time, and the only answer to that was to prepare something that could outlast you if it needed to. It had needed to. Marcus got in the truck, drove north toward the farm. He was on Aldine Road less than a mile from the gate when he saw the car. Dark sedan pulled to the side of the road just past the entrance facing out. Engine idling. Mercer wasn't in it, just a man Marcus didn't recognize in the driver's seat, looking at nothing in particular with the studied casualness of someone being paid to be somewhere and told to look like he isn't. Marcus drove past without stopping, parked at the house, sat in the truck for a moment. Then he went inside. Serena appeared from the kitchen immediately, reading his face in approximately 1 second the way she'd been reading situations for most of her adult life. He's been watching the road, Marcus said. How long? Long enough to know I left this morning. She was quiet. Then the gate. There was someone parked near the gate 2 days ago, too. I thought it was someone turning around. Marcus looked past her toward the hallway, toward the photograph on the wall. The man with the careful smile standing beside his parents. Watching that photograph in this house while Marcus had been 1,000 miles away carrying letters he didn't open, telling himself he'd get to it. I need to talk to him, Marcus said. Serena looked at him. That's not a good idea. I know, I'm doing it anyway. She held his eyes for a moment. Then don't go alone. I'm not asking you to come. I know you're not. She pulled her jacket from the hook by the door, the hook his mother had spent 3 days getting level. I'm not asking you either. Marcus looked at her. You're not the only one whose home this is, Serena said. They found Mercer at the house he kept in town, a restored colonial on the east side of Carver, the kind of property that announced itself without appearing to try. The sedan from the road was parked in the driveway. Mercer answered the door himself. He looked at Marcus, then at Serena. Something moved behind his eyes, a rapid recalculation that he covered with the smile, but not fast enough. Marcus, I'm glad you stopped by. I was hoping we could have a more productive conversation then. You know what's in that notebook, Marcus said. Mercer paused. I beg your pardon, my father's notebook, the one from the box under the floor. You mentioned it this morning at the farm. Used language that matched something written in the last entry. Language you couldn't know unless you'd read it. Mercer's expression didn't change, but the smile stopped being automatic. It had to be produced deliberately now, and the delay was visible. I think you may be misremembering what I said, Mercer said, carefully. Which means you've been in that house, Marcus said, or you sent someone who has. A silence. The particular silence of a man whose next move is being decided in real time. I'd encourage you, Mercer said, and his voice had changed quieter, flatter, the conversational pleasantry stripped away, to think carefully before you make accusations you can't support. Property disputes in this county have a way of becoming complicated. I've been through this process before. I know how long it takes. I know what it costs. And I know that a man who's been gone for 10 years doesn't always have the patience to see something through to the end. Marcus looked at him, studied the face. The same face from the photograph. The same calculation that had been running for 22 years, patient and methodical, and convinced it had already won. My father had patience, Marcus said. My mother had patience. They prepared for this a long time ago, and they left everything I need. You've been waiting for me to walk away. I'm done walking away. Mercer said nothing. I'll be at the preliminary review, Marcus said. Bring your attorney. He turned. Serena was already walking toward the truck. Marcus followed. He didn't look back. In the truck driving back up Aldine Road, neither of them said anything for the first few minutes. The fields on both sides going dark in the fading light. The farmhouse visible ahead, the kitchen window lit from inside, the shape of Miss Ruth moving past it. He knew about the notebook, Serena said finally. Yes, which means this isn't just about the land. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. It was never just about the land, he said. He pulled in through the gate, cut the engine, sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, looking at the house his parents had bought together. The house they'd spent 30 years building a life, in the house that had waited, that had been kept alive by strangers who didn't know its history, but understood instinctively that it was worth keeping. His mother had known someone would come. She'd said so in 3 sentences in a second-floor office in Savannah to a man she barely knew but trusted completely. Fill it. He got out of the truck. Vivian's car was in the driveway. Through the kitchen window, he could see her at the table, laptop, open folders spread around her, already building what he was going to need. Miss Ruth was at the stove. Eli was somewhere in the back of the house explaining something at length to Scout. Marcus stood on the gravel for a moment longer. The east fence repaired 2 days ago, holding straight in the fading light. The greenhouse warm behind the house. The oak tree at the end of the driveway shaped by decades of Georgia wind into something that looked exactly like what it was, a tree that had been here a long time and intended to keep being here. 22 years, 17 families. His father had been one of them, the one who said no. And 13 months after saying no, the road had ended on Highway 41. Marcus looked at the house. Tomorrow there would be a preliminary hearing. Carolyn Fitch County Attorney had the full package. Odom had the accident file. Wendell Cray had copies of everything. The chain was complete. The ownership was clear. And somewhere in Carver County, Gordon Mercer was sitting with the knowledge that the thing he'd been waiting 10 years to finalize had just become something else entirely. Marcus walked to the front door, opened it. The house smelled like whatever Miss Ruth had on the stove and wood smoke, and the particular warmth of a place that is being lived in rather than merely occupied. He stood in the doorway for a moment, the night at his back, the light ahead. He went inside. The morning of the preliminary hearing didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like the day after a fever breaks, when the air is cold and the ground is damp and the things that were hidden by the dark are simply sitting where they fell, waiting to be cleared away. Marcus was at the kitchen table by 5. He hadn't slept in the truck last night. Serena had cleared her throat after Vivian came back from the records office, pointed a finger toward the back bedroom, the one with the repaired subfloor where the cardboard box had waited for 10 years, and said, "The floor doesn't squeak anymore. Use it." He hadn't argued. An army cot was an army cot, and the wool blanket smelled like the cedar shavings Miss Ruth used in the closets to keep the moths out of the winter coats. He sat with his coffee, watching the black through the window turn to the color of wet slate. Scout was under the table, his heavy ribs rising and falling against Marcus's boot. Across from him, the navy blue notebook lay open to the last page. The heavy ink lines, Gordon Mercer, $47,000. Do not sign anything he gives you. Looked different in the early gray light. They looked less like a ghost voice and more like an unfinished chore, a fence that had been left down for too long while the weather moved in. The floorboards in the hallway groaned a short rhythmic click that meant Miss Ruth was moving before her joints had fully agreed to the day. She didn't look at him when she came into the kitchen. She went straight to the stove, lifted the iron kettle to check the weight, and set it down on the burner with a dull thud. "You're going to need a tie," she said to the wall. "I have one in the duffel," Marcus said. "Black, navy issue." "Black is for funerals," she said, turning around with her hands on her apron. Her white hair was pinned back so tight it made her eyes look wider than they were. "This isn't a funeral. This is county business. You wear the gray one your father left in the top drawer of the chifforobe, the one he wore when he went to Atlanta to talk to the bank about the tractor loan. It's silk, real silk. Not that polyester nonsense they sell at the plaza now." Marcus took a sip of his coffee. "Didn't know you knew what was in the chifforobe, Miss Ruth." "I helped your mother clean this house after the accident, Marcus Thomas," she said, her voice dropping into that register she used when a fifth grader forgot his spelling list twice in the same week. "We didn't throw things out. We put them where they belonged because we knew someone would have to handle them eventually. We weren't expecting it to take 10 years, but the moths didn't get into that drawer because I put tobacco leaves in the corners. Go get it." He went. The gray tie was exactly where she said it was, folded flat between 2 flannel shirts that smelled like old starch in his father's soap. It was wide, the kind of cut people stopped wearing in the late 90s, but the weight of it was substantial. When he looped it around his neck in the small mirror above the bathroom sink, his hands moved with the old military precision, half Windsor tight at the throat, no slack in the knot. He looked at his face. The jaw was his father's, yes, but the line of the mouth was his mother's, when she was about to tell a student that an excuse wasn't the same thing as an assignment. When he came back out, Vivian was at the table. Her laptop was already open, the screen throwing a blue glare onto her face that made her look younger and more tired than she was 26. She had 3 3-ring binders stacked to her left, each one filled with photocopies of the deeds she'd pulled from the county records office the day before. "The county attorney's assistant called at 4:30, Vivian said, not looking up from the keys. "Sandra Fitch doesn't like surprises. She spent the night with the package Odom gave her. She wants us at the courthouse at 8, an hour before the judge sits." "Is she ready?" Marcus asked. Vivian stopped typing. She looked at the binder on the top of the stack. She's a Fitch Marcus. Her grandfather was the surveyor who laid out the eastern half of the county lines in 1952. She knows every ditch and every stone marker from here to the Ocmulgee River. She doesn't like people who treat Carver County like a monopoly board. And Mercer's lawyer is a man named Vance from Macon. She said, her finger starting up again, a dry, regular clicking. He's the kind of lawyer who wears monogram shirts and brings 3 binders of his own just to show he has them. He's going to try to argue that the quiet title is a matter of administrative cleanup. He'll say the estate was abandoned and the county's notice was an invitation for a community partner to secure the asset. Secure the asset, Marcus repeated. That's how they talk when they're taking your barn, Miss Ruth said, setting a plate of dry toast on the table. Eat. You can't talk to a judge with an empty stomach. Your father always said a hungry man agrees to things just to get out of the room. Serena came out last. She had Eli by the hand. The boy was wearing his good trousers, the ones that were an inch too short at the ankle, and he was carrying his wooden rifle under his arm like a soldier on leave who wasn't quite ready to put his gear in the closet. He didn't say anything. He just came over and sat on the floor next to Scout, leaning his small shoulder against the dog's flank. Serena looked at Marcus, at the gray tie. She reached out, caught the edge of the silk between her thumb and forefinger, and gave it a small tug to straighten the line against his shirt. Frank wore that to the church council meeting when they wanted to pave the cemetery lot, she said softly. He told them the dead didn't need asphalt. They kept the grass. He win, Marcus asked. He always won when he was right, she said. He just didn't always live to see the grass grow back. The Carver County Courthouse was a gray stone building with 6 wide steps that had been hollowed out in the center by 80 years of boot leather. It smelled like wet umbrellas, floor sealant, and the specific brand of tobacco the bailiffs chewed when the judge wasn't looking. Sheriff Dale Odom was waiting by the double doors of the second-floor courtroom. He was in his Class A uniform, the dark brown wool that didn't give an inch around the middle, the gold badge polished until the county seal looked like it had been stamped yesterday morning. He had a manila folder under his arm, the edges frayed from 10 years of being shifted from the bottom drawer to the top shelf and back again. Fitch is inside, Odom said, nodding toward the door. Vance is already at the table. He brought 2 assistants from Macon, young guys with haircuts that cost more than my tires. Mercer, Marcus asked. He's there, Odom said, sitting in the front row of the gallery, not at the table. He wants it to look like he's just an interested observer who happened to be in the building. Marcus looked through the glass pane in the double doors. The courtroom was smaller than he remembered from when he was a boy, when his father had taken him to see a jury selection just so he'd know what the words duty and peer meant in a practical sense. The wood benches were dark pine dark, with generations of oil and sweat. Gordon Mercer was sitting on the right side. He wasn't wearing the blue suit today. He had on a gray tweed jacket, a soft white shirt without a tie, and a pair of trousers that looked like he'd bought them for a walk in the woods, but had never actually stepped off the gravel. He was reading a small leather-bound notebook, his head tilted back slightly so he could see through the lower half of his spectacles. He looked like a retired schoolmaster who spent his afternoons checking the rainfall totals. Then he looked up. His eyes met Marcus's through the glass. The smile didn't come immediately. There was a fraction of a second where the face was just old, the skin beneath the jaw loose, the eyes small and flat behind the glass. Then the adjustment happened. The shoulders dropped, the head tilted, and the careful neighborly expression came back into the frames. He nodded once through the glass, a short, polite greeting between men who understood the rules of the house. Marcus didn't nod back. He pushed the door open. The room fell into that particular courtroom silence, where the only sound is the click of heels on the linoleum and the rustle of legal paper. County Attorney Carolyn Fitch was at the left-hand table. She was 43 years old, her hair dark and cut in a straight bob that didn't move when she turned her head. She didn't look like her grandfather, the surveyor, but she had the same way of holding her pencil like a tool used for marking boundaries rather than writing words. She looked at Marcus, then at the folder under his arm, then down at her own legal pad. Mr. Aldean, she said, her voice carrying that flat mid-Georgia accent that doesn't waste air on vowels. Sit down. We have 12 minutes before Judge Miller comes out, and I don't intend to spend 11 of them listening to Mr. Vance explain how the law works in Bibb County. Marcus sat at the table beside her. Vivian sat behind him in the front row of the gallery, the 3 binders on her knees like a shield. Vance, the lawyer from Macon, stood up from the opposite table. He was 40, his hair oiled back with something that smelled faintly of lime, and his suit was the color of a wet slate shingle. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked at Fitch with the easy, fraternal condescension of a city lawyer who thought county seats were places where people went to buy seed corn and get their fishing licenses renewed. Carolyn Vance said, his voice rich as gravy, "I don't think we need to turn a simple title clearance into a federal case. My client filed a standard quiet title action to resolve an open tax delinquency on a property that has been abandoned for 10 years. The county was about to auction it. We saved you the administrative cost of the sale. If the heir has returned and wishes to settle the back taxes, we're happy to discuss a reasonable reimbursement for the filing fees and the maintenance work my client's representatives have already performed on the site." Fitch didn't look up from her pad. She drew a long, straight line down the left margin with her pencil. "The county doesn't require saving, Mr. Vance," she said, "and the Aldine property wasn't abandoned. It was in probate transition. The letters sent by the records office were received and held by the designated executor's representative. For 10 years, Vance smiled. It was a good smile. He'd probably practiced it in front of a mirror until he could show his teeth without making his eyes move. "Come now, Carolyn. A letter in a glove compartment isn't a legal defense against a non-occupancy tax lien." "We aren't discussing the letters, Mr. Vance," Fitch said, finally looking up. Her eyes were very quiet. "We're discussing the deed." She reached into her folder, pulled out the document Marcus had brought back from Savannah, the original parchment deed with the 1974 county clerk's red wax seal still visible in the lower left corner, and slid it across the wood table. It made a dry scraping sound against the oak. "This is the original filing," Fitch said. "The chain of title is unbroken from the original land grant in 1882 down to Frank and Carol Aldine. Marcus Aldine is the sole named heir in the valid will filed with Wendell Cray's office in Savannah 10 years ago. The quiet title action you filed this morning states that the ownership was unresolvable through standard inquiry. Your client has lived in this county for 35 years. He sat for a photograph with the owners in front of that very house in 1992. To suggest he couldn't find the chain of title isn't an administrative oversight, Mr. Vance. It's perjury." Vance's smile didn't disappear, but it changed shape. The lime smell seemed a little sharper. He looked down at the deed, then back at Fitch. "A family photograph doesn't constitute notice," Vance said, his voice losing a bit of the gravy. "My client acted on the public records available at the Carver County Courthouse. If those records were incomplete—" "The records weren't incomplete," a voice said from the back. Judge Henry Miller had come through the side door without the bailiff calling the room to order. He was 71, his black robe worn gray at the elbows, his face the color of old cedar that had spent 40 years in the weather. He didn't go to the bench. He walked straight to the clerk's desk, picked up the file Vance had entered at 8:15, and looked over the top of his half-glasses at the lawyer from Macon. "Sit down, Bobby," the judge said to Vance. "I've been looking at your client's name since before you passed the bar. I don't need you to tell me what's on the books in my own county." Vance sat. He didn't do it quickly, but he did it completely. Judge Miller walked up the 3 steps to his bench, his black robe swishing against the wood. He didn't sit down. He stood behind the high oak desk, looking down at Gordon Mercer in the front row of the gallery. "Gordon," the judge said. Mercer stood up. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked at the judge with that calm, respectful expression he'd used all morning. "Yes, Henry?" "Your lawyer says you couldn't find the owners of parcel 7703, Judge Miller said. "He says you looked and just couldn't find anyone who had a claim to that red clay on Aldine Road." "That was my understanding from the clerk's office, Henry," Mercer said, his voice mild. "The taxes hadn't been paid since Frank and Carol passed. The house was empty when my people went out there to check the timber lines. We were trying to prevent the property from falling into foreclosure by an outside investment group from Atlanta. We wanted to keep it local." "Keep it local," the judge repeated. He looked down at the file in his hands. "I have a response here from the county attorney. It was filed at 4:45 yesterday afternoon. Along with the response, Sandra Fitch included a list of 17 properties in Carver County that have been subject to the same quiet title process by your various holding companies over the last 22 years. 17, Gordon." The room was very quiet. Through the open window at the back of the court, the sound of a diesel truck shifting gears on Route 9 came through clear and small. Every one of those properties had an elderly owner. Judge Miller continued, his voice not rising, just staying level and hard like a stone wall. Every one of them had an open line of credit with a firm called Mercer Agricultural Credit that had been allowed to run past due without a collection notice until 90 days before the quiet title was entered. And 5 of those families aren't on their land anymore because your people settled the debt by taking the deed before the probate court could notify the heirs in the next county. Mercer didn't move. His hands were loose at his sides. The careful smile had vanished, now replaced by that flat, gray look Marcus had seen through the door pane. Those were private business transactions, Henry, Mercer said. The parties were represented by counsel in every instance. The counsel was your cousin's boy from Warner Robins Gordon, the judge said. He's currently suspended by the state bar for mixing escrow funds with his personal account. Don't play the country boy with me. We went to the same high school, and I know exactly how much your father left you, and I know exactly what you did with it. Judge Miller set the file down on the oak bench with a sharp crack. The quiet title action on Parcel 7703 is dismissed with prejudice, the judge said. The deed stands as filed in the name of Marcus Thomas Aldine. The back taxes will be settled by the heir within 48 hours, or the county will establish a standard 5-year payment plan based on his military exemption status. Is that clear, Bobby? Vance stood up, cleared his throat, and nodded once. Clear, Your Honor. Good. Now get your briefcases off my table. I have an adoption hearing at 9:15, and I don't want the smell of Macon in here when that baby comes in. The judge looked at Marcus. He didn't smile. He just looked at him over the glasses for 3 seconds, a long measuring look that took in the gray tie, the military haircut, and the duffel bag sitting on the floor behind the chair. Welcome home, Marcus, Judge Miller said. Your father owed me $20 from a bird hunt in 1998. We'll call it even. He turned and walked back through the side door before the bailiff could stand up. The hallway outside the courtroom didn't empty out immediately. Vance and his 2 assistants went down the stairs fast, their leather heels clicking like gravel in a tin can. They didn't look back at Mercer, who stood by the water fountain with his spectacles in his hand, cleaning the lenses with a white handkerchief. Marcus walked out of the double doors. Odom was beside him. Vivian was 3 steps behind the binders tucked under her arms, like she was carrying wood for winter. Mercer put his glasses back on. He adjusted the wire frames behind his ears, looked at Marcus, and then walked over. He didn't look like a man who had just lost a piece of land he'd been waiting 10 years to take. He looked like a man who had just missed a train and was figuring out if there was another one coming in an hour. You have your father's stubbornness, Marcus, Mercer said. His voice was still mild, still carrying that neighborly weight that had worked on 17 families for 22 years. Frank never could see when a project had gone past its usefulness. He thought that red clay was worth more than the dollars it could bring from people who wanted to build something real with it. Marcus stopped. He didn't put his hands in his pockets. He let them hang loose the way he'd been taught to hold them when a sergeant was looking for an excuse to make him run the 5-mile ridge at Fort Benning. The 47,000, Marcus said. Mercer's expression didn't change, but his eyes got smaller behind the glass. A personal loan. An old matter between friends. It was resolved a long time ago. My father didn't write notes about things that were resolved, Mr. Mercer, Marcus said. He didn't press the pen down hard enough to read from the other side of the page because the matter was settled. He did it because you owed him the money and you thought you could trade that debt for the land rights, and when he said no, you found another way to stop him from going to the county attorney. Mercer looked at Odom. Sheriff, I hope you're listening to this. This sounds like an actionable statement from a young man who has been out of the county for too long. Odom didn't look back at Mercer. He looked at the manila folder under his own arm. I'm listening, Gordon, Odom said. I'm listening to every word, and I'm thinking about a man named Deshaun Vickers. The name didn't cause Mercer to flinch. He was too old for that, too practiced in the ways of a small town where everyone knew everyone else's secrets, and nobody talked about them until the funeral was over. But the hand holding the handkerchief stopped moving. It stayed still against his thigh. Vickers was a good mechanic, Mercer said. A little unstable near the end. He had some personal problems. Left the state, if I recall. He didn't leave because of personal problems, Gordon, Odom said, stepping closer. The gold badge on his chest was 6 inches from Mercer's face. He left because you bought 40% of his shop 14 months before Frank's car went off Highway 41. He left because 4 days before that accident, Frank brought his truck in for a brake line check, and Vickers signed the ticket, and then you gave Vickers $22,000 in cash that didn't go through the shop's ledger. I have the bank records from Birmingham Gordon. They took 2 years to get, but I have them now. Vickers has been living in a trailer outside Tuscaloosa for 9 years. He's 62. His liver is failing, and he called my office at 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon because he didn't want to die with your name in his throat. The silence in the hallway was different now. It wasn't court silence anymore. It was the silence of a woods when the wind stops, and you can hear the dry leaves dropping one by one onto the pine needles. Mercer looked at Marcus. He didn't look at Odom. He looked at the Kuquan Yun with the gray silk tie and the brown dog waiting at the bottom of the stairs. "You shouldn't have come back, Marcus," Mercer said, his voice dropping into that flat, quiet register he'd used at his colonial house the night before. "The land was fine without you. The county was fine without you." "The land isn't yours," Marcus said. "It never was." Mercer looked at him for 3 more seconds. Then he turned and walked down the stairs. He didn't use the handrail. He walked right down the center of the stone steps, his tweed jacket moving slightly with his stride, a medium-sized man with gray hair going out into the Carver County morning to find his car. Odom watched him until the heavy oak doors at the bottom of the stairs clicked shut. "Fitch is going to the grand jury on Tuesday," Odom said, his voice carrying the weight of 10 years of waiting for the right paper to cross his desk. "The civil stuff, the 17 families, that's going to take some time to unravel. The state attorney general will have to handle the corporate filings. But the criminal side, the Highway 41 file that opens at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." He looked at Marcus, extended his hand. It was a heavy hand, dry and rough from decades of county work. "Your father would have liked the tie, Marcus," Odom said. Marcus shook it. "Thanks, Dale." "Get back to the farm," the sheriff said. "The drainage ditch isn't going to clear itself, and Serena Daw doesn't look like the kind of woman who lets a man sit around the courthouse all day when there's wood to be split." The drive back to Aldine Road was shorter than the drive out. Marcus drove with the windows down, the warm spring air coming off the loblolly pines, smelling like green grass and red earth after a hard rain. Scout had his nose out the window, his ears flat against his neck, his teeth showing in that dog grin that doesn't mean anything except that the air is moving and the speed is right. When he pulled through the gate, the house looked the same as it had that morning, but the light was different. The pale gold had turned to the high, clear blue of a Georgia noon. Vivian's car wasn't back yet. She'd stayed behind to help Fitch file the official dismissal paperwork with the clerk, but the blue sedan wasn't the only thing missing. The road was clear. The dark sedan that had been idling by the north fence for 3 days was gone. There was just the empty gravel, the oak tree, and the chickens, making their small, untroubled noises in the side yard. Marcus parked the truck by the well house. He didn't get out immediately. He sat with his hands on the steering wheel, looking at the porch steps. Eli was sitting on the top step, his wooden rifle across his knees, a half-eaten piece of cornbread in his left hand. He didn't have the binoculars around his neck today. He was just watching the driveway. When the truck engine stopped, he stood up, set the rifle against the house wall, and walked down the steps with that 5-year-old seriousness that didn't ask for permission. He came over to the passenger side, reached up and opened the door. Scout didn't wait for Marcus. He slid out past the seat, his paws hitting the gravel with a soft crunch, and immediately put his head under Eli's hand. "Did we win the tax battle?" Eli asked, looking up at Marcus through the window. Marcus got out, unbuttoned the gray silk tie, and pulled it over his head. He rolled it up carefully the way his father had taught him to roll a leather strap, and put it in his jacket pocket. "We won the tax battle, Eli," Marcus said. The boy nodded once as if that was the only outcome that had ever been under consideration, and turned to lead Scout toward the chicken coop. The dog followed him 3 inches from his heel, his tail giving that slow, deliberate thump against the gravel every 4 steps. Serena came out of the greenhouse. She had a pair of work gloves tucked into her back pocket, and her hair was coming loose from the pin at the back, a few dark curls hanging down near her temple. She stopped by the side of the house, looking at him with her arms loose at her sides. "Miss Ruth is inside," she said. "She's already looking through the pantry for enough flour to make a cobbler. She said if a man comes back from the courthouse with his skin intact, he deserves something with peaches in it." Marcus walked over to her. He looked past her at the greenhouse, at the neat rows of green seedlings growing under the plastic sheeting at the east fence line, holding straight against the ridge. My mother left a letter, Marcus said, with the lawyer in Savannah. She wrote it 4 months before the accident. Serena looked at him, her eyes dark and steady in the highlight. What did she say? She said the house was big enough for more than just memory, Marcus said. She said to fill it. A silence came down between them. It wasn't the strange silence from the first morning or the hard silence from Odom's office. It was the quiet of a room after the windows have been open and the dust has settled and the air is just air again, clean and ordinary, and belonging to nobody but the people breathing it. Serena looked down at her boots, then back at Marcus. She reached out, took the work gloves from her back pocket, and handed them to him. They were canvas heavy, the palms reinforced with rough gray suede. They were his father's gloves. She'd found them in the barn 3 years ago and kept them greased so the leather wouldn't go brittle in the damp. The drainage ditch is still waiting, she said. Marcus took the gloves. They fit his hands exactly. The leather was shaped to a palm that had held the same tools, walked the same rows, and refused the same signatures for 30 years. I'm staying, Marcus said. I know, she said. Now go fix the ditch before Miss Ruth gets the oven hot. She turned and went back toward the greenhouse, her boots making that regular, unhurried crunch on the red clay path. Marcus walked around to the back of the house. The air smelled like pine and earth and wood smoke from the kitchen stove. He found the shovel where he'd left it against the oak tree spit on his palms out of old army habit and slid his hands into the gray leather gloves. The shovel went into the ground easy. The soil was heavy red and wet from the winter water, but it turned over clean when you lifted it. He worked for 2 hours without stopping the rhythm coming back into his shoulders until the ache was just an ordinary ache, the kind a man earns by doing something that stays behind after he's finished. Around 3, Eli came around the corner with a tin cup of water. He set it on a flat stone by the ditch, looked at the length of the trench Marcus had cleared, and then looked up. Scouts on perimeter patrol now, Eli said. He's watching the south fence. Good, Marcus said, wiping his forehead with the back of his sleeve. Tell him to keep his eyes open. He knows, Eli said. He picked up his stick, shouldered it like a man who had 4 more miles of road to check before the sun went behind the pine ridge and started back toward the house. Marcus watched him go. The boy's shadow was small against the red clay, but it was there sharp and clear in the afternoon light. Behind them, the farmhouse stood against the sky, its gray shingles silver in the high sun, the smoke from the chimney rising straight up until it disappeared into the blue. It looked like an old house that had seen a lot of people go down the road and had stayed put anyway, because it knew that roads always went 2 directions, and if you waited long enough, the dust always came back to the place it started from. Marcus set the shovel blade back into the ditch, leaned his weight into the iron curve, and drove it deep into the earth. He didn't look at the road again that afternoon. There was no reason to. He was already where he was going.